Hello and welcome to the second video in this series where I am looking at champion matchups from Season 12 in the 4 major regions and analyzing how the laning phases went, the biggest farm gaps, CS gaps, and try and figure out why they happened. We have the top 20 here in the Jinx Aphelios matchup that happened 385 times across the 4 major regions. That includes international play. Actually, it didn't happen all that much at MSI and Worlds. I think a total of 6 times. We look back at Spring as it being the major handcuff that it was. It happened like 300 times in Spring, but at MSI it died out, and then afterwards it only was sprinkled in there along the rest of the year. The most common result in this matchup would occur at 4 CS and 7 CS in favor of Jinx and negative 10 CS in favor of Aphelios. Those 3 results happened 12 times. I'm using 15 minutes as the barometer. CS diff at 15 minutes. The mean, so the average gap, Jinx was ahead by only 3.5 farms, so once again, very close. And the median is 4 farm in favor of Jinx. So Jinx slightly better in this matchup. I believe the win rate was under, I think it was pretty close. I should have wrote it down on the board. Now, when we factor this in, by the way, I am taking into account the supports. So it is the 80 carry plus support versus 80 carry plus support in how the CS diff is calculated. So if you have a support that's inting and stealing all your farm for no reason, I'm not going to penalize the 80 carry for that. Most common support matchup was Nautilus versus Leona. That would happen 22 times. And by that I mean Jinx Nautilus versus Aphelios Leona. Opposite, it's not as much. The biggest gap we saw was 71 CS. Yes, at 15 minutes, we'll get into that. We have the top 21 here because there was a tie for 19th between 3 different matchups. We're going to go over the 11 matchups really briefly, and then we'll go more into depth in how the top 10 matchups came to be that way. So, 19th, we have Deft and Barrel. Barrel on a Tom Kench, Deft on a Aphelios. So this is a Aphelios. We have right here 19. So Aphelios winning over Jinx. Deft and Barrel with Tom Kench over Henna Delight. Fred at Brion. Delight on a Thresh. This was a, I believe, 34 CS gap. FBI and Huhi. Tom Kench once again against Instinct and Chime in the LCS. Chime on a Rakan. And then Betty and Chow Chow on a Thresh versus Eric and Jin Zhao from LGD, Jin Zhao on a Lulu. So that would happen at 34 farm. At 17, so right alongside there, we have a 36 CS gap in favor of Aphelios versus Jinx. Kabe and Promise Q actually gapped Patrick and Mickey. This occurred in spring, I believe. Yeah, it did, because obviously Promise Q was not on the team in summer. And they actually show up twice, and ironically enough, they lose both games. So we'll get into that in a second, but Kabe and Promise Q open up a 36 CS lead over Patrick and Mickey X. Promise Q on a Nautilus, Mickey X on a Thresh. Gala Ming with a Nautilus over Kepler Yao Yao from Thunder Talk. Yao Yao on a Braum. And then after that, 15 is a 39 CS gap. Doggo and Crisp from BLG. Crisp on a Thresh over iBoy and Uyanja. Uyanja on a Nautilus from Rare Atom. Unforgiven and Kaiser. Kaiser on a Pike over Patrick and Mickey X. Mickey X on a Lulu in that one. Both tied with a 38 or 39 farm gap. You see 40 here. 15 is here. The next matchup is the lowest of the top 10 matchups where Jinx is ahead, and this is where I'm going to say between 14 and the next one after 19, so after the how would I put this? The 12th biggest gap for Aphelios over Jinx. Actually, Jinx bot lanes had 25 gaps bigger than the 12th biggest gap by an Aphelios. So oftentimes the Jinx if it was going to go and sway one way over 35, 34 CS or more, it was going the way of the Jinx 2/3 of the time. Jinx in these matchups I have here, 9-1. The one loss, let me look here. The one loss, shoot, which one was it? Oh, I think it was Tactical in Shenyi. They lost, which we'll get into. Otherwise, 9-1. The Aphelios, when the Aphelios gets ahead by that much, 7-4. So 14. So the biggest, the first Jinx gap we have on here was Danny and Vulcan on a Bard, beating Wild Turtle and Destiny. Destiny on a Rakan. I believe that occurred in lock-in. We have an Aphelios gap, Aphelios over Jinx. I believe this one was like 42 or so. Puff and Southwind on a Thresh over Zhao Zhuji and Lucas. This was on IG, so Thunder Talk versus IG, very early on in the LPL spring split when IG was using Zhao Zhuji in the bot lane, and Lucas was on a Lulu. And then we have Doggo and Crisp once again, so they appear twice on here. Crisp on a Leona over Eric and Jin Zhao. Once again, Eric Jin Zhao losing this matchup hard. This one, Jinx favored. Jin Zhao was using a Nautilus in that one. And then 11th, we have Han Sama and Isla. So this was in lock-in. Isla on a Thresh over Neo and Biofrost. Biofrost on a Lulu. So those are your top... those are the ones we're just briefly going over. And now we're going to get into the 10 biggest ones and why they ended up being that way. So, we have 2 tied for 9th. First, we have the Jinx gap. So, Teddy and Hoyt on the Kwangdong Freaks. Hoyt on a Thresh versus Ice and Cal. Ice and Cal on Sandbox. This obviously occurred in spring. I have something in my eye, damn it. This occurred in spring. Teddy and Hoyt would open a 46 CS lead in this matchup. Cal on a Leona. So it was Thresh Leona support matchup. Jinx Aphelios 80 carry matchup. Teddy got ahead by getting a kill and an assist at Rift Herald. Kwangdong would then dive bot lane. Teddy would get 2 kills and an assist at the Drake. Teddy would then take the bot turret. And then he would just continue to rack up kills in another team fight. So Teddy really pulled ahead in this matchup in the first 15 minutes. It was actually one of the bigger kill scores we had. I think it was 4-0-5 or 4-0-4. And it led to a 46 CS lead between the 2 bot lanes. Tied with that was an LPL matchup. Hope and Missing, gapping, Rise and Crisp, Missing on a Nautilus, and Crisp on a Renata. Obviously BLG going with their backup 80 carry with Rise. This was also a 46 CS gap. This was opened up because JDG would get a 2v2 kill. My notes are in front of me. So JDG would get a 2v2 kill. Then use that to take the bot turret. They would then get a kill in mid lane, I believe, on Rise, which would obviously limit his farm, and open up the gap bigger, and they would then take that turret as well. So they took a couple turrets. They got a 2v2 kill, and that led to JDG running over BLG in that summer matchup. Next, we have Kabe and Promiscu. Promiscu on an Alistar. Getting ahead of Karzi Labrav on Vitality. Kabe and Promiscu on a Aphelios. So it was Aphelios, Alistar into Jinx, Tom Kench. So we had 2 Astralis gaps, and both of them were losses. It's kind of crazy to think about, really, that they had 2 monster gaps and they couldn't do anything with it. This one was 49 CS. Astralis would start off by getting a gank. They would then dive. There would then be a skirmish in the bot lane where Vitality would actually come out 2-1, but the one death was on Karzi, so once again could not farm, getting farther and farther behind at 80 carry. Astralis would then take both bot lane turrets. They would take not only the first, but then the second turret in the same push and blow them out in the bot lane. But Astralis blow it in the end and lose that game. So not a surprise there. Obviously, these matchups, I should probably be pointing it out, we have 9. We have the 2-7 matchups. 4, both above 50 CS. Actually, shoot, we have another 7 matchup. I'm getting ahead of myself. Another gap that happened that was 49 CS was FlyQuest over Golden Guardians. Johnson and Aphelios, so it was a Jinx, Braum lane, into a Aphelios Rakan, lost an Ole. This was 49 CS, like I said. FlyQuest would open it up with a dive, go 2-0 in that dive, get a couple kills, get ahead, and then they would end up going top lane and diving there as well and getting Johnson in a place that was made him comfortable, and he was able to run away, and they created a 49 CS advantage over Lost and Ole. Next, past 50 now, so these gaps are more than 50 CS. Actually, the next 3 were 51 CS each. Viper and Mako over Gala and Ming. This was an Aphelios set for Viper and Mako against a Jinx Nautilus. This matchup is the biggest Aphelios over Jinx gap. It's represented here. So we see 3 more. Well, actually, technically, there's a tie with 51 CS for a Jinx gap. So this was the highest Aphelios gap, was Viper and Mako against Gala Ming. That is a, that's a serious bot lane matchup, right? Like, we're seeing a lot of, RNG into BLG. EG into Immortals. TL into Dignitas, JDG into BLG's backup. Like, you see a lot of blowouts, and it's like, okay, well, I could see that. You got Zhao Zhuji in here, and he's in there again. We're not there yet, but he is in here again. So, to see EDG blow out RNG in that way in this handshake matchup was pretty astounding, and it is the biggest Aphelios gap. So why did it happen? Which one is it in front of me? It is that one. So, EDG would dive bot lane early, get ahead. Actually, it would be 2-1, so they'd get 2 kills in exchange for 1. They would then get a kill in the 3v3. RNG would respond by ganking bot lane, so actually they tried to even out the score. RNG would then get a 2v2 kill, so RNG really were coming back in this matchup, but then EDG would drop, I believe they dropped Drift Herald. They would take both turrets, get a kill under the second turret, and I believe that kill was onto Gala, which just caused even less CS for them. And then they would go roll lane swap top lane because they have nothing to do in bot lane, and they would then dive top lane and get another kill, get ahead, give Viper more gold. So Viper, like, it was very back and forth in that matchup. One of the more back and forth matchups we had in the top 10, but it resulted in the biggest gap in Aphelios' favor. The 2 Jinx matchups that were at 51 CS. First, we have Danny and Vulcan. Vulcan on a Tom Kench. So Jinx, Tom Kench into FBI Huhi. FBI on the Aphelios, Huhi on the Renata. This one was the highest stakes matchup that we have in the top 10. It was actually in the grand finals this past year. 100 Thieves would actually open it up, getting a 2v2 kill to start the game off. And we kind of know that Danny and Vulcan struggled in laning phase. We would say it often that they really succeeded in the team fights, and that happened in this matchup. Danny would get a couple kills at the Drake, get another kill at the Rift Herald, and then FBI would get picked off in the top side of the Rift, and it allowed Danny to open up a big lead. He'd get the kills, he got gold, despite being 2v2 killed early on in their bot lane. EG's bot lane would come out ahead by 51 CS when it was all said and done. The last matchup that occurred that resulted in a 51 CS gap would happen in the LPL. RNG, so RNG coming out on the good side of this with their Jinx. So it was Jinx, Thresh, and IG, so Zhao Zhuji, once again, and Lucas. Lucas on a Seraphine, so it was a weird matchup. We didn't see a lot of support Seraphine in spring, but they were running it in IG, and they got gapped pretty good by RNG in this one. RNG would force the sums out, and Zhao Hu would then just solo kill Zhao Zhui in the bot side of the Rift. It was actually one of the cleanest gaps that I saw out of these top 10. Like, that's all that happened. RNG forced the sums out, Zhao Hu roamed, killed the AD carry, and literally, I mean, it was pressure, but it wasn't kills. It wasn't something significant that RNG was doing that actually forced IG into a hole that resulted in a 51 CS gap in favor of Gala and Ming. Third place, third biggest gap occurred with Sandbox and HLE. HLE, unfortunately, isn't on this list down here, but in 2 of the final 3 matchups, they're on the losing end. Prince and Cal blew out Samdi and Vista by 54 CS at 15 minutes. Prince and Cal, so it was Jinx, Tom Kench, into Aphelios, Rakan. Sandbox would go up by diving bot lane. They would then get a 2v2 kill as a 3v3 started to form and get another kill. So going 2-0 in an extended skirmish. Prince would then rocket on fleek and pick him off in the jungle. He was getting picked off, and Prince was able to send a rocket from Jinx and snipe him. They would then take a turret and dive top lane. So Prince was able to really open up a big advantage, resulting in 54 CS. The second biggest gap would occur in the LCS. TSM over Golden Guardians. This was tactical in Shenyi. Shenyi on a rel, so he lives on in this one. Over Lost Ole. Ole on a Leona. This would be a 58 CS lead, and TSM would find a way to lose this game, if I recall correctly. TSM would get a kill level 1. Golden Guardians would then gank bot lane and get a kill on Shenyi. TSM would then force Golden Guardians to recall with a lot of pressure, able to go up some farm that way. And then there would be fights in the mid lane, but Tactical's kind of doing his own thing in top side of the rift and took the turret. So he was just running up CS while fights were going on in mid, and his team was losing in mid. He was just kind of doing his own thing, taking the turret and being like, I've got the turret, guys, don't worry, as everybody on my team loses. So, resulted in a 58 CS gap, TSM's bot lane over Golden Guardians, but they lost the game. So, definitely a really interesting thing. That's obviously a 2, which is way, way different than the average, right? These numbers, we have 50 CS gaps over the average. The biggest gap, so we're going to actually... First things first, kind of like screwing with you here. The top 21 matchups, I think it breaks down to 12-9 East-West, and that was something interesting because when I looked at the Gwen-Nar matchup, it was like 18-2 or 17-3 or something. Like it was really lopsided, Eastern gaps over Western gaps. Like more often than not, the top Gwen-Nar matchup was just pretty standard in the West if it was played, and more often than not, it was played in the East anyways. I think it was like 85-16 or something. But in this matchup, we see representation from all 4 regions, and East-West pretty even. 12-9 out of 21 is much closer. So the biggest matchup occurred in the LCK. Like I said, HLE gets the privilege of being on the losing end of 2 of the top 3 matchups. It was Guma and Keria, Jinx and Tom Kench, into HLE, Aphelios, Karma. That number 1 is way over here. And you probably can't make that out, but that's a 70. A 71 CS gap by Guma Keria over Samdi and Vista. Absolutely blew them out in spring. Sorry for tapping the mic there. T1 would open it out by diving. What do we got here? Diving for a double kill. They would then turn that into a bot lane turret. They would outplay a top dive that resulted in a 2-0. So T1 are in top lane. HLE try and roam and dive on them. But T1 outplay it overall. Come out ahead 2-0. They then would take the top lane turret. And by 15 minutes, Guma was 4K gold ahead of Samdi in this matchup. By far the biggest gap we saw in Jinx Aphelios out of 385 matchups. I don't think it's any coincidence that the best support, Keria plays a nasty Tom Kench. He plays a nasty everything. And rewatching those 15 minutes, he is just so disgusting. Like, Keria had a lot to do with this gap. Like, it was just disgusting. So, hopefully this was interesting for you. If you missed my Gwen-Nar matchup video, that's going to pop up around myself right now. Comment down below with a future matchup that maybe you want me to look at from this past year. Bot lane, I'm going to do this way, though. I'm not going to do support or AD carry by themselves. But we'll do one if you enjoyed it that much. Like the video if you like it. Subscribe to the channel for daily League of Legends content. Follow me on Twitter. Join the Discord. Become a YouTube member. And thank you for watching.